Good afternoon. Welcome to the Dynamism of Short-Term Savings. This event is co-hosted by the AARP Public Policy Institute and the Aspen Institute Financial Security Program. My name is Catherine Harvey, and I'm a Senior Policy Advisor with the Public Policy Institute for AARP in Washington, D.C., and I'm pleased to moderate today's discussion. Today, we'll be talking about new empirical evidence about what it takes for U.S. households to build and sustain financial security. We will focus on the role of liquid assets, in particular short-term savings, as one important component of financial well-being. Now, it may seem strange or potentially insulting to suggest during a global pandemic when so many people are out of work and suffering financially to tell families that they should be saving. And I want to state from the outset that today's conversation is not about wagging a finger at consumers for not saving enough to ride out 6 months or more of unemployment and the worst recession since the Great Depression. Instead, we want to take an evidence-based approach to the question of what it will take to equip households to better deal with more common financial emergencies, like when the car breaks down or the hot water heater kicks the bucket in the middle of winter. There's a growing body of evidence that predated the pandemic that found that even a modest savings cushion can mean the difference between keeping your home or getting evicted. It can help families from falling into an endless cycle of debt. To spark the conversation today, we have two brilliant researchers here to share their insights. First, Shada Elmi from the Aspen Financial Security Program will help us understand what does savings look like for low-income households. How do families use their savings in everyday life and in the midst of crisis, in particular the pandemic? Next, Dr. Jorge Sabat of the Universidad Diego Portales in Chile will present his research on the relationship between short-term savings and longer-term financial well-being. After their presentations, I'll kick off a discussion on solutions, and I hope you'll participate. If you have a question as you go along, please use the chat box to enter that question. And let's also tell everyone else that we're having this important conversation and they can join at any time. Please use the hashtag Aspen FSP Live, and I'll ask that be put in the chat, Aspen FSP Live. Let me start by introducing our panelists. Shada Elmi is the Research Program Manager at the Aspen Financial Security Program, and she's co-host of today's event. I should say Aspen is co-host of today's event. Shada manages FSP's Consumer Insights Collaborative, and she can tell you more about that because the CIC is the data source for the research that she'll be sharing today. Prior to joining Aspen, Shada led quantitative and qualitative research on financial health at the Pew Charitable Trusts, and she evaluated federal programs as a research analyst at MEF Associates. Our second presenter is Jorge Sabat. Dr. Sabat is currently an assistant professor in finance at the Universidad Diego Portales in Chile. He earned his doctorate from the Olin Business School at the Washington University in St. Louis. His research focuses on household finance, macrofinance, and structural econometrics. Dr. Sabat has published in the Journal of Financial Economics, the World Bank Working Papers, and the St. Louis Fed's In the Balance. He will share joint research with Emily Gallagher of the Leeds School of Business at the University of Colorado Boulder, published by the AARP Public Policy Institute. So to get started, our first presentation is from Shada Elmi at Aspen. Shada?
Hello, I will unmute myself and I will share my screen. Bear with me as I do that. Good afternoon, everybody. As I pull this up, I try to pull this up. See? All right. So thank you, Catherine. It's great to be with you all here today. And I know it's been a long Monday for many folks. So we're really excited to have you here and for you to all be joining us today. I'm here to share some of the top level findings from the paper that was recently released from about the cycle of savings from the Consumer Insights Collaborative, or the CIC, which Catherine just mentioned. Before I dive into those findings, let me tell you a little bit about the Consumer Insights Collaborative. It's an effort across 9 leading nonprofits who provide financial empowerment services and solutions to low and moderate income consumers across the country. In my role, I got to work directly with all of these organizations to surface insights about the financial lives of the members and the clients that they serve, and the kinds of products, program, and policy solutions that can support the financial well-being of households. Their logos are pictured on your screens. With that, I will share some of the concepts before turning it over to Jorge. So this report highlights the critical importance of the efforts that people take to build, use, and replenish their savings, or what we call the cycle of savings, and then how this contributes to people's financial security and stability, and especially so for low and moderate income households. We know that households want to save, but that they are not always in the position to do so, nor necessarily equipped with the right tools to be able to support these efforts. In the report, we identify 2 overarching barriers to the cycle of savings, and then several ways to address these barriers. In my prepared remarks, I will highlight some of those barriers, but we'll leave the rest to you to dig into in the paper, as well as in our moderated discussion coming up. So what exactly is this cycle of savings? I already mentioned that it's about this cycle of building, using, and replenishing savings, but let me take a quick step back. Some of you are probably familiar with the work of the U.S. Financial Diaries. In that work, they coined the term saving for soon, and found that households were saving, but that the total money going into savings is actually 3 times more than what you find at the year-end balance. So this closely ties to what we're discussing here. Individuals save, then they draw down on those savings during the course of the year for near-term needs and for goals, and that's okay. It's a success, really, to be able to deploy those savings in that way. And this act of saving over shorter time horizons contributes to maintaining financial stability in the face of volatile finances and thin margins. And it also opens up space for investing in family well-being, as well as economic mobility. So we define the cycle of savings as this ongoing act of building, using, and replenishing savings that is able to strengthen financial resiliency against shocks and allows families to be able to invest in themselves and in their economic mobility. In other words, this cycle of savings is really dynamic. It frames savings as a verb and not just a noun. It's something that people are really interacting with. These savings are protective. They represent a personal safety net of unrestricted cash, meaning that it's money that can be used for any purpose. Using liquid savings to address needs is also often the safest and the cheapest option for families, which is especially important for those that don't necessarily have a large buffer between their income and their expenses, which decreases the likelihood that they would actually be able to access affordable credit. And finally, these short and medium-term savings can be mobility enhancing and used for those kinds of purposes, whether that be for education or entrepreneurship or a whole slew of other things. Given that, how is this different than other savings concepts? So on the right, you'll see a simplified version of the kind of traditional model of savings, that one which assumes a mostly unidirectional flow into savings, and for those savings to always be growing. This is kind of that longer term model. You can think of it as what people are doing during their working years in order to be able to save for retirement, that they hope not to have to tap into until later in that time, and where often economists are discussing the role of compound interest. In comparison, you'll see the cycle of savings to the left, which is much more interactive. It's especially relevant for households with little wiggle room between their income and their expenses. When we refer to that cycle of savings, they're really meant to be drawn down when needed unexpectedly, or used towards a specific goal, and then replenished as individuals are able to do so. It plays a role as a financial buffer, and then is available for families to be able to help them make progress on their own goals. You see that here, we depicted that pattern as more erratic for that reason. And just a quick differentiator, the cycle of savings encompasses emergency savings, including that kind of little e emergency, as well as those big E emergencies. So it's both, but it's also not just emergency savings. Here are some examples of different ways that households could use it in the course of a year. And you'll see a few different types of examples here and the ways that they may impact the available savings. So some take a little bit more than others potentially. We know that based on research from the CFPB, from USC, from Pew, from the Financial Health Network, and many others, that financial cushions are really a critical, and that liquid savings are really the most important of these ways that people are, apologies, let me back up. There are financial cushions that are really critical, and liquid savings are one of the most important for this and for being able to predict a household's well-being. Unfortunately, we also know that there are barriers to being able to save. And in the report, we identify these two kind of overarching reasons that people are unable to engage with their savings. The first is this lack of routinely positive cash flow, which is really where income typically covers their expenses. This also encompasses another related issue, which is that debt can also hinder people's ability to have consistently positive cash flow. And then the second is that many features of available savings products and services make access and utilization difficult, especially for low and moderate income consumers. This is for a variety of reasons, including only offering products and programs digitally, requiring minimum account balances or charging banking fees, not allowing for kind of contribution control, or not giving people immediate access to the funds when they need them. When these products and services don't actually match the way that people save, as this cycle kind of demonstrates, for example, it also makes it less likely that people will utilize them. So the paper details a series of ways to be able to overcome these barriers, but I want to save that for the discussion and stop here to give Jorge a chance to present some of his findings. I'm looking forward to that and to the moderated discussion that'll follow.
Thank you so much, Shada, and I'd love to dig into big E and little e emergencies when we get to the discussion section for today. But without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Jorge Sabat to share his new research just released on Friday on the AARP Public Policy website. Jorge? You can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Sure. Hello. Thank you, Shada. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, everyone, for attending this session. I'm going to share my screen now. Here it is. Well, as Catherine and Shada told you, I'm going to be presenting this our paper. This is joint work with Emily Gallagher. We have been working with AARP in this very interesting topic. So let me start with some introduction and motivation. So I love this quote. Taylor, probably you know him, this behavioral economist has this quote that people are not done, the world is hard. Right? And we are going to talk about this quote at the end of my presentation, but I would like that you have it, you keep it in your mind. So let's go for a more general overview. So liquidity. This talk is going to also like check us. If you think like the main topic here is liquidity, and liquidity seems like very important for households, and this is like even in developed countries. I like to say this because we as a financial economist, we used to think that this was like very important for like poor countries and the developing countries, but like we don't think like that anymore. This is like more like a more modern macro view. Kaplan and Violante, two professors, macroeconomists, like they define these two groups that they call the poor hand to mouth and the wealthy hand to mouth. And they say that if you split this, like remember we are economists, so we like to simplify the world. So if we think that we have these two types of people, we can describe they say that they can describe the macro fluctuations of a country, and they give some idea of what proportion of people will be considered as poor hand to mouth. That is the group that I'm going to focus in this presentation. And these are people like theoretically defined as people that have no liquidity buffers, and that they usually have like no access or very poor access to credit or to financial instruments in general, right? So take that group in mind. So when we started working on this with Emily, we said like, oh, but there is like probably there is a big overlap on this group that like the macro people call it poor hand to mouth, and with income, with a very simple definition of income. Imagine the US and you split it in 3 groups, and you have the low, the middle, and the high income group. We're I'm sorry, I haven't said this, but we are always talking about data like from these surveys, the survey of income and program participation that I might call it SIP, okay? And we are going to use this 2009 to 2011, sorry, there is a typo there, as one of our data sets. And like a secondary data set, we are going to use like the most recent version of this survey. So in this graph, you are seeing the relationship between what we are going to define after that is financial hardship, the probability of experiencing financial hardships, against like in the x-axis, you are going to be liquid assets or liquid savings, like using Sheila's wording. So as you can see, like liquidity seems very important for especially for low-income people. And actually, you can see that the figures suggest that this relationship is convex. So $1 of savings when you have very little can reduce your probability of experiencing financial hardship a lot. But when like you get to higher levels of savings, like this marginal benefit of saving more like tends to zero, right? Like the relationship gets flattened, right? In these other cases, you don't see this convexity. So, and we use these figures just to motivate what we are going to do. Like we are going to suggest that there is like this idea of like a minimum liquidity buffer, or like a optimal liquidity buffer that is especially important for low-income people because they don't have access to credit, they don't have like other alternative options to where to borrow or I don't know, get money, and they also like live like very close to this like kind of subsistence level where like you don't have much cushion. You cannot like go and like rent a cheaper apartment, right? When you are like living kind of closer to the limit, right? So this is the main idea of our paper. So in these graphs, we show like this is taken from our paper with Emily, our working paper with Emily, still not published, but it's work in progress. And you can see that this relationship is there even if you measure a financial hardship like in different ways, or if you, for example, measure your savings as, for example, months of income. Like how, like if you think you can have savings that are equal, for example, for to 2 months of your annual income. So, like the main result of our paper is that we found that that this threshold, so this convexity, occurs at roughly 1 month of income, okay? And that's like around $2,500, right? So in our paper with AARP, we do an extensions of our paper. So we specifically run what is called an out of sample test, where we are going to test our threshold point, and we are going to use it as a minimum liquidity buffer rule. The idea is that what we are going to do is we are going to take this more recent version of the same survey, the SIP, and we are going to construct this more general measure of financial hardship that is going to be called a hardship index. How it's constructed, I'm not going to enter into technicalities, but we have these different proxies of financial hardship, like for example, lacking access to food, not being a household that are not being able to pay utilities, housing, or have access to health. And we are going to combine all these different variables using a technique, a statistical technique that is called principal component analysis, and we are going to construct this index. This has been used in this multidimensional poverty literature. Alcaer and Foster are the main reference there. So we are just borrowing that idea from there, and we are going to have this outcome variable that is going to measure like financial health at a household level, right? And what we can do is we are going to run two statistical tests at the end, like econometric tests, right? We are going to first see if households, for example, that are that save this amount higher, like we can split a household, the ones that save this amount, like at least this amount, this minimum liquidity buffer, and we can see how they evolve in terms of their this index, right? This financial hardship index. What do we find? We find that the probability that a household is in the high hardship, imagine that you split household in three groups: high hardship, mid hardship, and low hardship. We find that the people that at 2013 had at least this amount of savings have a significantly lower probability of being in this high hardship group at the end of the survey. We can track household for 4 years, right? From 2013 up to 2016. And then we can also measure this like in marginal terms, right? So how if you improve or not, like a change in the index, right? And what do we find? We find that we see improvements of people that at any point in this period, 2013 to 2015, like at least one time they were above this minimum level that we suggest that is like kind of like a rule of thumb, right? And this is like similar to what Shayla was suggesting, right? So savings follow have a cycle, like people like savings, liquid savings are not constant. You have savings because you are going to use it when you need it, right? So you spend it, and like at the end, like what you are doing is like self-insuring against like falling to financial hardship. That's our main interpretation of our results. Just like this last things. So the main idea of this paper with AARP is like to think like if these popular savings rules that are out there make sense for low-income people. Like if you see what Sue Orman recommends, like she talks about 8 months of living expenses, like 8 months of savings, and this is related with the duration of unemployment, for example. There is this other website that talks about $14,000. So these are like very high numbers for like low-income people, like low-income household. So like it might be that these people were never talking about low-income households, but that's not very clear, right? But that's what is around, and we want to make clear that the idea of our paper is to like evaluate or like think about these rules from an empirical point of view. So this is one of my last slides. So I'm just putting these equations, complicated equations, to provoke and say that so consumption savings problems are very complicated. So if you think that you are trying to solve this problem as an engineer will do, like he will solve a dynamic optimization problems, like problems that are mathematically very complicated. So, but like, if you think like, first is crazy to think that people could solve like this type of mathematical problems. But like if we go deeper, we can also think that it's crazy that people could understand their level of impatience. People could understand what are the probabilities regarding these liquidity shocks. Like, I'm going to need more money in this period with these probabilities. So Olivier, this MIT graduate last year, has a paper where he tries to rationalize saving decision of low-income households, thinking about like their beliefs. So this is very, very, very recent research. So like, think also like that if you want to solve this optimization problem, you have to think about the future. Like also you have to think about these scenarios. Like, for example, like if I get get to be like really poor, and I get some like social benefit. Like, we have this paper with Emily where we talk about the role of Medicaid eligibility after the ACA and how that affects the propensities to save of low-income households. So, like, even if you want to solve this correctly, it might be very complicated, right? So, just conclusions. Having a liquidity buffer will make your life, like, at least financially, like, easier, right? So that's the main idea. Like, the thing is that following an attainable saving rule could be a good starting point. Like if you think like this idea of saving, like, as part of a financial strategy, right? But we have to design and we have to think about financial strategy for low-income people, because these are like very, very special cases. What are the main implications from like my perspective, that like I do household finance research? So that we can talk about this in the during the Q&A session, but I think there are many interesting things and extensions that that like we need to work together to solve. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jorge. Dr. Sabat, we appreciate you walking us through what ends up being a very elegant analysis. I encourage you to download the paper, even if you're not an economist. You can get through it, and it ends again on the high note here, which is having a liquid savings buffer. Even reaching that high water mark once over the course of 3 years has substantial benefits over the long haul. And so with that, I'd like to start our discussion. Please enter your questions and comments into the chat box, and I will read them out as I receive them. As we're wrapping up here, I want to ask Shea to go first, and then follow Jorge and just answer the question of what results from your research really surprised you or challenged conventional wisdom about savings.
I should unmute myself. Hi, sorry. So maybe one of the things that was a bit surprising or just really interesting for me was how many of the CIC members really resonated with this kind of emphasis of high frequency savings. And it wasn't just the CIC members, but that was where, the kind of impetus for this research. It was this observation that this traditional model of savings doesn't necessarily fit with the way that many of the folks that they're working with actually save, and that the ways that we measure and the ways that we think of savings don't necessarily reflect all of this work that people are doing. We know how hard people are working to save, and maybe we're just missing a little bit of the story by not being able to see this kind of nuance of the way that many people do have to kind of build up, use, and then replenish the savings as possible. So I think that was something that really resonated for me, and seeing the paper from Jorge and how much others in the field have resonated with this work, but also, Jorge and Emily, the paper that you have done really demonstrates how even having this small buffer at any point over these 3 years can be a really important and critical way for people to build their own financial resiliency. And it doesn't necessarily have to be above that level, it's just hitting that specific level.
And Shada, before I hand the question over to Jorge, there is a question in the chat which we get pretty often, which is, how is it possible for low income to save, especially living paycheck to paycheck? I know you address this in your research, as does the entire Financial Security Project, looking at the sort of requirements to get to the level where a household can set aside cash.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great question, and I think it's kind of a common misconception that people cannot save, and a very understandable one of, if you're going from paycheck to paycheck, there's just no space, right? Money is coming in, money is going out. And I think it's really important. That was why one of the first primary barrier that we talk about in the paper is really needing to have routinely positive cash flow. It's a huge barrier to people being able to do that. If they are not able to at least cover their typical cost of living, the expenses that they need to survive. So that is, a kind of primary baseline. That said, many of these DIC members and the organizations that I showed up on the screen earlier, and I can send a link for that, just if you want to read a little bit more about each of the organizations and the work that they do. They are working with a lot of folks that are living in a kind of paycheck to paycheck situation. Some of them do financial empowerment and financial coaching and other ways to try to help create the space needed to be able to put money aside. Some of that involves being able to address debt and other things that are also making that more difficult, and to try to encourage that kind of routinely positive cash flow. And I think we can talk about this in a little bit too, but I think one thing that we saw with the CARES Act was the additional money that people were receiving, some from unemployment or through the economic impact payments that came through, that gave people that opportunity that may not have always had the same ability to save, to be able to save. Tax refunds are also a really great situation where we often see that people are able to put money away. So it might not look the same for everyone. It's going to be a very individual situation of what your cash flow looks like, and there might be times where it's easier to set aside kind of ahead of other times when that income might be lower. Seasonal employment is definitely a real barrier during parts of the year to make that happen.
And we will get to some of the policy and product design considerations that come from this and related research in just a minute here. Jorge, could you tell us what surprised you, or what challenges conventional wisdom in the results that you presented?
So I have to say that like in academia, it's surprising when you get results, like even when the things seem very obvious, especially if you think about economics, the idea of an optimal savings, or idea of a buffer is everywhere, since the beginning of macroeconomics as a science, or whatever we can think as an academic research area, right? The thing is that it's surprising that we have never seen before that someone actually shows that savings actually can improve people's lives, that even when that's theoretically so well accepted. I've never seen empirical research that shows this. And even this idea of we are solving this very complicated model, where from an outsider's perspective, I cannot tell you exactly how I can derive this optimal point, because I don't know all the risks that you are exposed to, or your specific characteristic of condition where you can live from, and the idea of taking these different perspectives that we do in our paper with Emily, where these points gets derived from experience, from observing people, that some people save more, some people save less. We don't know really why people are saving more or less, but at the end, we derive this point from people's household experience. So like, and then like testing if this thing works, like as I was saying before, like in this different data set, in this different time span, and finding that like you can observe statistically significant financial like improvements in your financial health, or like our measure of hardship. That was very, very, very impressive to me.
It is. It seems so elemental or elementary, I should say, to the study of consumer finance, and yet there isn't a lot of literature behind it. And so this is an important contribution. But as you can see from the chat here, people have lots of questions about different permutations of rules of thumb. So I want to again pass a question to both of you. Well, so what does this mean? What does it mean? Just thinking of a low-income audience, which of course is not a monolith, how do we either change the advice that we're giving people or change the products and services and policies that give people choices around savings? Since as you stated, Shada, most people express an interest, they want to save, but there's this gap between intention and action, and other barriers to address as well. So Shada, I'll start with you. Just what does it mean? And how can we put it into action? And you're on mute, so go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing that we're seeing in the research, so I mentioned the CARES Act, we saw that a lot of folks were able to get more money than they normally have on hand necessarily, or some people were getting that extra $600 for some time. What some of the research is really showing is that created an opportunity for people to save. I think what is really difficult, especially right now, is that we don't know. There's a lot of unpredictability. There's just kind of a lot of unknowns about how households are and how long this current pandemic is going to last, how long the current economics and how jobs are set up right now are going to be in this situation in terms of being able to save for the, we often talk about short-term savings in this like 3 to 6 month period. We are now in November, COVID hit in March. So it's a very long time for households to be thinking about savings and planning when we don't know what the next day is going to bring, what the next week is going to bring. We're watching a lot of things. And so households are making these decisions based on the information they know. The folks at the JP Morgan Chase Institute found that with the extra $600 that was coming in, a lot of households were able to save. And then once that money stopped coming in, households did have to draw down on it. So I think one thing that's important, and one thing I do want to note, and I mentioned earlier, is just recognizing that households saving up and then having to draw down is a perfectly reasonable thing to do, right? You're saving for the unknowns, you're saving for these goals. One of the things that we saw was that people were doing just that when they had the opportunity and when they had the funds available to do so.
Right. So one implication, if I might take that a step further, is to not shame people for spending their own savings, right? And certainly there are two sides of the savings coin. One is to cut back on consumption, right? And one is to build assets. And much of the personal finance literature that's out there, and journalists and such, kind of are proponents of cutting spending when you can. But in this case, spending your savings, right, is a good thing, and is the right thing, and potentially not putting as many barriers to getting access to your savings as we might expect. Jorge, what do you see as the practical applications of this, either for consumers or those who serve everyday households who are trying to save more?
So I was remembering the first time that we presented this idea of like thinking about these buffers in Colorado. I remember this professor that he's actually a psychologist, and he said that, oh, but there is something very interesting. Like there is a lot of evidence that when you give unattainable goals to people, like people like either don't pay attention, or they feel like super discouraged and they do nothing. So we were thinking like, yeah, if people like hear that they have to save $15,000, like maybe you are like going to feel really bad, right? Like, so the thing is that what is the application that I see here? Like, well, I think this is like, I'm seeing this problem like as an engineer, because I think that that like if you think like this concept of rule of thumb, like it started in engineering. Like people know that when you shoot a rocket, like you are not going to capture all the variables, and you get some like kind of good solution that performs relatively well on the different scenarios. So I think that this idea of like trying to have this rule of like, if you can save until like you can get like, for example, at least one like month of savings, like and don't feel bad like if you need to spend it out, but like try to live with that goal. It can be like important for people that advise low income households, that like there is the probably like I totally agree with Shayla. Like many of the financial instruments that are there are not very customized to this group that very special needs, like either like their periods of unemployment are very different, and so like to middle income or high income people. So like I think like to design these different instruments where this part of like the rule, like, and I think that we have to acknowledge that when you give some advice, for example, there are two problems here. Like we can be wrong. Like you needed to save less, right? Like your optimal was lower than, for example, 1 month of income, because I don't know, you can like borrow money from your parents, like if something like goes bad. Like and I as an advisor, I cannot know that, right? But the thing here is that, and again, I like to think about this problem as an engineer. Like you usually care, you know that you're going to be wrong, but the problem is that the rocket crash or something like that. Like you have to think about that. Like what is the most conservative way? And if you put like this goal that is totally unattainable, like we are not going to do much. But so I see that this is like one part of this one month of income rule. Like I see it like as a starting point, like a strategy, like in a strategy that probably it has also like need to include like some access to credit, like you probably need a buffer, like in your credit card, or like you like we have to think like in a broader view, and think that this can be like this saving goal has to be like maybe one part of this broader strategy.
Right, I agree that certainly setting something that seems more attainable, or that is practically speaking more attainable, at least out of the gate, wouldn't discourage people from starting. And there's a related question here in the chat that has to do with longer term savings. The question is there a rule of thumb for when these populations, and I assume in this case we're talking about similar low income population, should consider long-term savings, or should there be a sequence, right? Is the idea first to build up short-term savings and then long-term savings? I'll take moderator's prerogative here really quickly and point to the emerging automatic IRA programs the state that several states have put in place right now around retirement savings, which are disproportionately helping low-income people set aside a small seed for retirement automatically with every paycheck. And California just put out new data last week showing a major increase in savings balances among new enrollees, even amidst everything that's going on. So I think it's possible, right, to simultaneously build up a longer term savings buffer as well as a short term savings buffer. But I also want to get your opinions as well, Shayda and Jorge, around what is the right sequence, if there is one, and how do long term and short term kind of coincide from what you found from your research?
Sure, I can jump in. So building off of what you said, Catherine, I think it's really important to emphasize that you can do, it doesn't have to be an either or, it can be a both and. Especially we're seeing also these programs that are allowing for things like sidecar savings, where we're allowing the long-term and the short-term to be connected, looking at ways to automatically help people save, making savings both easy and affordable, having it kind of do it in the background. But I think one of the important pieces here, also jumping back to what Jorge said, is it's really important that these things match the way that people actually use them, actually need them, both in engaging people and actually signing up for these programs, but also in terms of them actually making people's financial lives better. So I think that's a really critical piece. One of the things that we talk about in the paper is this kind of idea of tailored automaticity. So something that, there's this, a lot of research, especially in the retirement savings world, that really demonstrates how important it is to be able to do this kind of automatic savings, how much it's helped people be able to save. But one of the things that can be difficult is whether or not the person, the individual, has the ability to say, this is not a good time for me to do this. I cannot save as much as I was saving maybe at a different time. When money is a little bit tighter, maybe right now is not the right time for them to be contributing the same amount. So we kind of call this tailored automaticity, where the person has better control over their ability to save and contribution amount. But also, if there are ways to automatically capture that, that can be looking at people's, inflows and outflows of funds. I think are important ways to do that. But I would say that that simultaneous piece is definitely a possibility for many.
And Shada, would you say that's primarily something that financial products can rise to meet that challenge through technology, or are there also policy implications to achieve tailored automaticity?
Yeah, so I think, Catherine, you probably know a lot more about some of the kind of moving in that space in terms of policy, but the CFPB has released some new guidance that's really helping. I think part of an issue of getting more people into the space is actually just knowing what is allowed and allowable. So as new regulations are put in place and new, there was this template that went through. The CAS template is, getting really in the weeds about this, but just allowing or signaling what is available and possible allows more, creativity and more people to get into the kind of see themselves as a player in this. So I think we see financial institutions, absolutely, but we're also seeing, fintechs, like fintech companies that are able to jump in, and some of the CIC members have worked to create different kind of savings wallets or pockets to help people save in these different ways. As regulators are able to make clear that these things are available, it opens up the opportunity. Employers are getting really interested in emergency savings and these kind of connected programs with long-term, because we know that employers are a really big piece of the retirement savings space. And we're starting to think about whether that is also an opportunity for the short term.
Thanks, Jada. And I'll try to get into the chat a link to the CFPB CAST template, which invites employers to use automatic enrollment to provide emergency savings options through payroll deduction for their employees. And this is a relatively new program, and I think a good marriage of where policy can provide the certainty for financial services providers and financial institutions to jump in and really use the technology for good and to help people along their savings journeys and to achieve their savings goals. We have about 9 minutes left here, and I have a couple of questions in the chat that I've been neglecting. So first, one more question for Shada, and then I'll zoom back out, Jorge, and you can bring us home. So Shada, someone asks about the lack of trust in financial institutions as a barrier to accumulating savings. And in particular, if you have any thoughts on employer-sponsored loan programs in which the employer facilitates loans that employees repay through payroll deduction. The person asking the question suggests that maybe trust in employers could play an important mediating role between employers and financial institutions. What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah, light topic. So I would say first and foremost, we definitely talk about this in the paper because it is really important. There are many reasons why there can be a lack of trust with financial institutions and individuals. And I think that really recognizing that that exists, the kind of mistrust is there for a reason, especially amongst undocumented families that can contribute with difficulty in actually wanting to save in these kind of formal institutions. And then, you know, there have been just historically some populations have been left out of programs or have just not necessarily been included in the same way or have lost a lot of their own, you know, wealth because of this. So that distrust exists for a reason. And I think that one of the reasons that many people think that employers could play a bigger role is because there is often more trust between employees and employers because of, and mind you, this also means that this is often for those employers that are providing benefits, which isn't all employers. But there are really big opportunities there to be thinking about ways to better connect people to these types of programs. So if it isn't the traditional financial institutions, then it could also be these, you know, the CIC members are working with folks and to try and overcome skepticism. And one of the things that came up, and it's not just financial institutions, it's generally there's just a mistrust of whether things are real. And, you know, something that we talk about a lot is just with the CIC is that it's really hard sometimes to see the difference between good financial advice and bad financial advice. I think it's hard to differentiate between the two. They often sound very similar. And so having this kind of trusted intermediary can be a really important piece of it for the CIC when they were trying to get some emergency funds out to folks. One of the things that came up was that they felt really proud of their members because they had talked to them about different schemes that can actually be really detrimental, could be fake. And so people were calling them, and this was with Neighborhood Trust. They mentioned this on a webinar recently with Save Life, who are both CIC members, where they were trying to give these emergency cash transfers to folks. And they called and they were like, somebody is posing as you. You know, somebody says that they're going to give me all this money, and they were like, very proud of you, but also this is real. Definitely accepted. Like we're part of this. This is, you know, a legitimate thing. And so I think that's also been an interesting piece that the CIC has contributed to, and the ways that they have worked with their partners and others on the ground. I think involving community organizations is really important. So that others are aware of the availability of these programs and products and the different services, just to make sure that others recognize that this is a legitimate, you know, opportunity and not a potentially wealth depleting measure.
Right. We had similar inbound calls to the AARP member hotline when people received their economic impact payments on the cards, in some cases on cards or check that. And people are on high alert with regard to financial schemes, et cetera. A shameless plug for the AARP Fraud Watch Network, which is our way of educating the public about what to be on the lookout for. But trust is certainly an issue that comes up time and again in these conversations. But I think one thing that's important and really comes from your findings that you shared today is that this is evidence-based and in not coming with a bias. We are, right, none of us here is trying to sell a product. And I think that just adds to the credibility of the advice here. Last, I think this is a clarifying question for Jorge, and then I'll wrap us up because we're almost at the hour. Jorge, at the beginning, I think you had pointed to the 2,500 figure, which is the modified sort of rule of thumb in your paper with Emily Gallagher, and then later referred to an 8 months of salary income. I think there's one caller who was confused. Is it correct that the 8 months is just an example of a very high number at sort of an unattainable goal in most people's minds?
So when we started this project, we were asking people that that work in this financial advisory world, like in St. Louis, like where you work with like a group of people, and we asked them like, so what do you answer to people, to your clients, when people ask you how much they have to save, and like they all reply, they all said like, oh, 8 months of income. And we were like, where, how did you calculate that? No, this is so sort of like everyone's know that. So like I wanted to talk about this because like even if you Google this is like what is the optimal like saving buffer? Like you are going to get this number. So actually I don't know how like you get this number, but like what I want to say is that like when it seems that people like hear this advice like very often, and we what we are doing is like just comparing our number to what is out there, and like ours at least sounds much more attainable. That's what I want.
Great, thanks for clarifying. I think one really important takeaway here is that there are still many remaining unanswered questions, and in particular the research that Jorge and Emily are doing builds on their previous research, but just really opens up a whole line of questions around the relationship between short-term and long-term financial stability. And we're looking forward to hearing from many of you on the call and others in your network who are interested in probing more on those questions, because let's face it, right? Consumers need it. People who are in the business of serving individuals and communities need this sort of evidence-based, even if they're imperfect rules of thumb, at least rules of thumb to go on, especially if it means, right, that in the long run, families will be better off, because that's really motivating and that's where the impact comes from. I just want to thank our panelists again today, Shada Elmi and Jorge Sabat. And in particular, behind the scenes running the show today is Emily Urban at the Aspen Institute Financial Security Program. Thank you all for joining. Explore the links that we've put in the chat box today and go back to the event page for links to the 2 new research papers that we've showcased here. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, bye-bye.